Okay. Good evening. I'm going to give some folks a moment to get on and come on in the room here so we can get started with this great conversation about one of the most exciting books that I've read this year. So I can't wait to share the author and talk a little bit about the story. So come on in the room. And as you join, please let us know where you're joining from as you come in the room so we can know who all is represented here today. For those of you who are joining for the first time, my name is Marcy Thomas, and I am the founder of Brown Girl Collective and the BGC Book Club, which has been around. Brown Girl Collective has been around for about 12 years, and the book club's been around for just about a year and a half. So it's a pleasure for you to join us this evening for yet another conversation with an outstanding Black woman writer. So I don't like to hold people's time. So without any further delay, I'm going to go ahead and talk about our author and the book for this evening, When the Reckoning Comes. Now, the author, LaTanya McQueen, is the author of When the Reckoning Comes, and it begins like this, an essay collection. She has an MFA from Emerson College, a PhD from the University of Missouri, and was the 2018 Robert P. Dana Emerging Writing Fellow at Cornell College. She is an associate editor for the Revived Story magazine and the creative nonfiction editor for Gigantic Sequence. She's on the board for Iowa City's UNESCO City of Literature, and on top of all of that, she's also an assistant professor of English and creative writing at Cole College in Iowa. So without any further delay, I'm going to bring her on in the room, LaTanya McQueen, Dr. LaTanya McQueen.
Thank you. Hello.
Welcome. Well, it is indeed a pleasure to have you here with us this evening.
It's good to be here. Thank you. Thank you all for coming. Thank you for having me.
Yes. I was really excited when your team reached out about the book and had a chance to read it. And there's just so many themes and things in it that I found were powerful. And I'm hoping that others will enjoy it just as much as I did. So, let me put some information just so if you're joining later, you will know exactly what we're talking about this evening. So let's see. So what was it that prompted you to write When the Reckoning Comes? What was your inspiration for the story?
That's a good question. It's a long answer to that question. So I'll try to be as succinct as possible. I was doing a PhD at the University of Missouri, and around that time, I was thinking of writing. I was thinking about writing about my ancestry. I have an ancestor who was a slave to a North Carolina senator, and I was curious about her life, and I was trying to kind of think about her life living on this plantation. I decided I thought it would be a worthwhile endeavor to eventually go to the plantation where she came from, but also I wanted to visit a couple of them as well. And so I spent a year and I visited some in Louisiana, in Mississippi, and then in the Carolinas. And when I went to these places, one of the things that I noticed about them is that they do not tell about Black history really at all. If they do, it's usually an afterthought. They tend to be a lot of these places. They tend to focus on white audiences, on the white gaze, and they tend to be very much like tourist attractions. And they cater to white audiences. So they talk about the big house and the architecture and the owners, and they frame it as this is worthy of being admired because of the fact that this is worthy of being admired. These people were worthy of being admired and remembered because of the fact that they are wealthy. Never mind how they got their wealth, which was off the backs of slave labor. And so and the experience of visiting those places never left me. And so part of this book comes from that. Part of this book comes from also too, when I was doing my PhD, I was there during the student protests that made national news.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that happened, well, there's two things that happened during that experience that have influenced this book. The first is that, again, I noticed how there were particular stories that were being told about the situation, and the stories that were told fulfilled a particular intent. And nobody was really discussing the real issue of why these protests were happening, and thinking about the legacy of racism, both at the University of Missouri, but also too in the town of Columbia, as well as a lot of a similar issue of erasure in terms of Black history happening, not just at the university, but in the town. But also too, so I was thinking about that, and I was also too thinking about how, for me in that experience, going through that experience, my response was to turn inward and to sort of like retreat. I have a friend who was at a different program, and his program also too had a lot of racial tension and student protests happening. And his response was to, instead of turning inward, was to become even more outspoken and turn more towards activism. And so I remember kind of thinking, what is the difference between him and me? Why am I turning to fear? Why am I retreating inward? What is causing this? And so I wanted to write a book that in some ways is thinking about that through the perspective of Mira. Mira is a character who has been, she, in the beginning of the book, she exhibits a lot of anti-Blackness. She exhibits a lot of ingrained bias. Some of that has been handed to her, has been taught to her by her mother, but also too, some of it has been like there's larger societal influences that are causing her to think in this way that she does. But she's a character who believes that it's basically respectability politics. If you act a certain way, if you say certain things, if you present yourself in a way that is agreeable, then maybe you will be absolved from racism, is sort of her worldview. And she's also somebody who doesn't get involved, who doesn't, she's like a character who retreats. And I wanted to write a character that is dealing with that and coming to a conclusion and coming to a reckoning that it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how you act. It doesn't matter how, like, people are going to see you how they're going to see you. And also to recognizing that these ingrained biases that she has are a function of white supremacy, and recognizing that connection and the ways in which this is also too tied to history. So those are like the two main, the larger horror premise. I had been thinking about the white gaze a lot, right? Like from the experiences of visiting these plantations. And I thought it would be interesting to use this larger idea of, because one of the like larger premises of the book are that these like slaves are seeking revenge, right, on the descendants of those who enslaved them. And so I thought it'd be interesting to sort of to take this premise, which the idea of it is sort of centered in the white gaze, right? And so I wanted to use that in a book and exploit it, if that makes sense. So it's a lot of things, and that was as succinct as I could try and get it.
Right. Well, as I said at the beginning, there are a lot of things kind of running throughout the story. And one of the things, it definitely felt very current. It feels very current because we know that there's been a lot of things about, have these plantation weddings and people, going to the plantations and partying and doing all these things. Actually, I know it was a big thing with the Bachelor. I want to say that it was earlier this year, where, one of the young ladies was going to these had gone to a party, and it created, some issues when people were saying like, is that really the right thing to do? So it definitely felt current in that regard. And then also just to give a little bit of the backstory. The story centers around three friends who grew up together in a small town in North Carolina. And the story talks some about how they grew up together. It's a young black woman, Mira, her black male friend Jesse, and their white friend Celine, who is a like, I guess people would consider a poor white trash, so to speak. Growing up in this black neighborhood with the black children, and just some of the things that they experience as young people. And the crux of the story is taking place 10 years later, when Celine gets married, is preparing to get married, and invites her black friends to come to her wedding at the plantation. So that's kind of the backstory of how we got there, for those who may not know what the story is about. So, but yes, I just found it interesting, even in the fact that, Celine asking her black friends to go to come to this wedding. And I feel like Mira was kind of struggling with it at first. So even though she may have had feelings about, her blackness, or, or biases that she may have had against it, she still felt a little strange about that. Tell us a little bit about that.
Right, like she doesn't want to go. And in the beginning, she tries to sort of make excuses, right? Like Celine, I don't know, like it's this situation where, and I feel like a lot of us have been in something similar, where it's like you have these people that you've known maybe from childhood, or just people from your past, and you were close to them once, right? And then you somehow either something happens where you reconnect with them, or you see them again, and it becomes this, or you hear from them again, and you kind of wonder, the situation forces you to re-examine the past and your past relationship with them, right? And so for her, I think part of her desire, or I guess part of her reasoning for going, is thinking about like who this person was to her in her past, right? Like, because they were close friends. Celine was somebody who meant a lot to her at one point in her life. And so how much is that worth, right? Like, how much is that past relationship worth to her now in the present? Is it worth her going back, even though they're not friends anymore or close anymore? So she's sort of toying with it in that regards, but then also too, part of her motivation also too is to go back to see their other friend Jesse, who she used to be in love with, which also too, it goes back to like, for Mira, is this because of the fact that she has these other motivations for returning? Does that mean, is she a bad person, right? Like, is she a bad person for going back and not really wanting to go back for Celine, or not having her be the main reason, be the other reason? I don't know. But those are the reasons. And then in terms of the plantation, that's another thing too. I think people have, I don't want to say question, but this kind of thing of like, I guess the difficulty, right, of being a Black person and going back, knowing that this wedding is going to be had on a plantation. I think that's also to her, her dilemma. But there is this larger question of like, well, one, what does she owe Celine because of their past? Then also two, Jesse is going, and she's curious about him. And also this larger thing of like, well, how does Celine not see it? So.
Right. There was just so much in that, because, of course it's on the plantation, and this is a place where, as children, or I should say young adults, because they were teenagers at the time, where there were some things that happened at the plantation that created an issue for Jesse earlier on. And, Celine being aware of that, it did seem kind of strange. It's like, oh, forget about that. All that was in the past. Come on down, come on to the wedding. Let's not, dwell on those things that happened before.
Yeah, well, part of it, right, like, is a person's association to a place, right? So, like, this plantation, the Woodsman plantation, it means something different to Mira and Jesse, right? Like, both because they're Black characters and they have, especially for like Mira, who knows her ancestry and knows that it's connected to this place. But like, they know, like, as being Black people, right? They look at plantations and they're thinking about the fact that their ancestors were slaves on places like this, right? So they have a different association to it, but then also too, Mira and Jesse have a different like past history because of the fact that they went there and visited, and these things happened to them that changed their lives. Celine didn't go, right? Like, Celine didn't go, so she has a different past connection to this place, but also too, she doesn't have ancestors tied to, like, she doesn't have ancestors tied to it. She also too, it represents, and I think this is important because this gets back to how in our contemporary culture, how a lot of people in the South think about these plantations.
Right.
For Celine, it's representative of a symbol of wealth. It's a status symbol. She's somebody who grew up poor, who wants to be of a different class status. She wants other people to see her of a different class status, and having her wedding at this place is a means to achieve that. So she's looking at this and thinking of it as, this is the status symbol.
Right.
It's the best place to have it. So why wouldn't I want to be? Why wouldn't I have a wedding at the best place? Which is what happens in the South in these plantations. Like, people go and they visit and they have their weddings and they do all these events because they are viewing it as these places of status and health, and like money, and they want to align themselves with that. So.
Right, and you're so right about that. As I mentioned earlier on, I lived in the Savannah, Georgia area for about 12 years, and there weren't necessarily a lot of plantations per se, but there were a few. But one of the things I did notice, there are a lot of subdivisions and things like that have plantation in the name.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that would never be a place that I would want to live, just because of the connotation of that. Wherein someone else might think, back in the day, we called them, places plantations, and it is what it is. Because we know that there are probably, there's hallowed ground that we're probably walking on at many points in time that we don't even realize, where it could have been burial grounds and things like that. But I guess it's just to know it, or to go to a place that is specifically claiming that as a part of the heritage, that can be challenging.
Yeah. I was talking I did another interview, and the host was talking about how she's from this area where they have there's a wealthy subdivision that is on plantation grounds. You can see parts of what the plantation system was, and then there are around it are these basically these houses and things. It's like a community that's built literally on plantation ground.
Wow.
But yeah, we don't I think there are everywhere if you look hard enough, pretty much everywhere there's the legacy of slavery, but we don't really talk about it. We ignore it. So.
That's very true, because also, in that area, for those who aren't familiar with the area, Savannah, if you've heard of barrier islands, in South Carolina and things like that, Hilton Head, which you hear nowadays, a lot of people go to Hilton Head, it's turned into this great resort. But once upon a time, those islands were heavily populated by Africans, African Americans that were brought to the land. If you heard of Geechee Gullah culture, a lot of those people, that was their land, and it's now been taken over. So there are just ties that oftentimes we have to the land, or our history is in the land, but people take it and gloss over it, and kind of like you were saying, going to the places that you visited, it's done like this great resort. It's this great thing, and it's whitewashed literally and figuratively, that they don't necessarily show what was really going on there.
Yeah, it happens a lot. It happens a lot in our country.
Well, one of the things I noticed in the book, that you had a space, there's this place that has now been built up as this fancy, resort, but there were spaces that were to represent the slave quarters, but yet they were fancier than what it would have been. Talk a little bit about that. I found that interesting.
Yeah, it's like the like people comment a lot on the air conditioning.
Yeah, it's like,
a lot of that actually. I mean, the air conditioning is invented, but a lot of that section. So there's a section where Mira she gets to the Woodsman plantation, and she's trying to kind of get acclimated. And you get to see like what these grounds are like. I've had people sort of describe it as like carnivalesque, which is interesting. But the place, I mean, the plantation has been renovated to provide guests with this antebellum era experience, complete with reenactments. So she gets there and she's seeing, right? Like she's seeing reenactments happening that are depicting aspects of slavery, right? She is seeing the way in which guests are interacting with the grounds. So some of that, I mean, it's kind of, when I was writing that chapter, I wanted to kind of walk a line between what felt true, and then what felt like, is this real? Could this happen? And then being uncomfortable with the possibility that it could, I guess. But a lot of that, and it was hard to do, because a lot of it what were things that I saw and experienced when I visited these places. So like, I mean, some places did have reenactments. I went to one and they had like they had a guest dressed up as like a Confederate soldier in a tent in front of the grounds, and you go up there and then he would give this little spiel. A lot of the tour guides were dressed up in costumes and these sort of perform these roles. The discrepancy between the tour guides being white and a lot of the workers, majority of the workers being black, and then the guests being white, right? Would happen. There were a lot of places, like you could drink in Big House, right? So it's surreal to kind of go and like to go as a black person and to like do a tour of a big house, and then at the end see people sitting on the porch and then looking out on the grounds and drinking, mint juleps and like admiring the view and thinking about like being on vacation. This is like a vacation experience.
Right.
One had a bar, and the bar, you could sit at the bar and drink, and there's like a restaurant / bar and eat, and then you could see the slave cabins. So, I mean, it was so some of it is true, some of it, I made up. But like, it's kind of like a line. Yeah.
Yeah, it's something. Now, just to kind of shift gears a little bit, I'm getting more into, because we don't get spoilers. For those of you who watch regularly, don't get spoilers, but just enough to to spark your interest if you haven't had a chance to read the book yet. Now, they go for the wedding. For Celine's wedding, both Jesse and Mira are there for the wedding, and then some things happen where the wedding things happen with the wedding. I'm trying to tell it without telling.
It's hard to do, I think. It's hard to do.
Things happen with the wedding. And in the midst of all that, primarily Mira is like seeing visions of some of the things that are going on. She's hearing voices, hearing laughter from some of the basically the spirits of the people who were enslaved at this location. Um, and that's kind of where, if you hear this book described in a horror genre, that's kind of where it's getting into some of the things with the spirits and things that are happening with some of the guests and things like that. There were a lot of different ways that you could go with bringing those spirits back. Just tell us a little bit about that, and incorporating that into Mira's journey, really, as well as a larger part of the story.
Yeah, it's hard to do without kind of spoiling the book. I guess a way to think about this book, and a way to kind of think about the end, because I do think people tend to kind of have a lot of questions about the second half of it in terms of what's happening and why it's happening and being depicted the way that it is. And I guess the way that I can explain why it is that way is that if you think about it again, right, like this is a character. So part of the book is thinking about this question of reckoning, but it's thinking about this reckoning and with Mira specifically. So that's one way to kind of think about it. But then also to kind of add to that, again, like Mira is a character who has ingrained bias. She's a character who at the book is anti-Black, right? And she is, over the course of the book, is coming to terms and beginning to recognize, right, the ways in which she has these belief systems, and the ways in which these belief systems have affected her relationships with other people, have affected her job, have affected her own sense of self and how she views herself, right? So if you think about it in that way, and then also too, if you recognize that this is also too a function of white supremacy, right? Mira has to have her own reckoning, right? Just like a lot of people, not just characters in the book, but also too,
we do,
right? Like people in real life who exhibit like racist beliefs or racist behaviors, who exhibit anti-Blackness, who exhibit who have these biases, right? It's not just. I think we want to think about these things in terms of like. Or think about racism in terms of like the KKK, right? But like they're more like nuanced forms, as well as the ways in which Black people can also too harbor these sentiments and these biases, right? Like we all do need to come to a reckoning, and Mira in this book needs to come to a reckoning. So she's seeing these things, and she's part of the reason why she's seeing them is because of this. So that's one sort of explanation. Also, to kind of get at, I guess, like the horror piece of it, like the revenge piece of it. I mean, I wanted to walk the line, and it's between what felt real and what could be possible within the book, if that makes any sense. So, in terms of how you read the events, and by the events, I mean the the supernatural events. Like you can read them, you can go either way. You can read them in terms of real world explanations, and you can read them in terms of this like larger supernatural event. Because again, like I wanted people to think about this larger question of should there be a reckoning, and why, right? Which is also too a debate of the book between the characters.
Absolutely, because that is a point, and that just how everyone looks at things differently. You mentioned earlier on, like certain things happen, whether it be in your immediate life, or some of the things that have happened on a larger scale where the whole world has gotten involved, like George Floyd and some of the things that happened last year, and some of the others before him, Breonna Taylor, all of that different people approach things in the way that oftentimes feels most comfortable to them. And that's what Mira was doing, approaching things in the way that was most comfortable to her. But then she had to, kind of do some self-reflection. And I guess through these conversations or these observations with the ancestors, so to speak. It gave her a different view of certain things.
Yeah.
And sometimes, that's, what has to happen for us. It may not happen in that supernatural way, of course, but just gaining more knowledge so that we can, determine, are you going to be the person that gets out and, and stands and, asks for all of these things? Or are you going to be the person that, kind of stands in the background and maybe is a little more quiet in your way of protesting or, working against things that, or that you feel aren't right. So,
Yeah.
that's true.
Yeah. Mira also too, like, there's also too this like larger thing about the relationship between the past and the present and how the past influences the present, right? Like, part of why Mira sees things that she does, right? Like she's seeing, like you had mentioned this earlier, like she's seeing history, right? And I think, I don't know, maybe we don't, but I don't know. Sometimes I feel like we forget like the ways in which we forget the influence, like the larger sort of influences that have caused us to think the way that we do, but also too like thinking about the larger historical influences that have led to how things exist today. That makes any sense. So like an example of this would be like I teach African American studies, and oftentimes in African American studies I will have my students I talk about sundown towns, and I'll have them research their hometown and see if it was a sundown town, and most of the time it is.
Wow.
And so it's like the situation where you have these students, oftentimes these white students, who they have never thought about like why in their hometowns or small hometowns, why they're predominantly white, why they've never or if they've ever seen anybody black, why they've never had a black teacher, right? And it never occurred to them that part of that reasoning might be because there is this larger history of black people being shut out of these communities that they are a part of. And so they're beginning to think about that, and they're beginning to think about the ways in which history now has shaped their present, has shaped like their experiences, their worldview, right? So that's also too, like I was thinking about that, trying to kind of, not just in writing the book, but in the things that she sees, right? Like showing this relationship between the past and the present.
Right. And also, the things that she's seeing, the things that she's learning, also the things that she's being taught, because, her mother, is in the earlier part of the book. She's featured more, in the early part of the book, but how her mom was, telling her certain things based upon her experiences, and how she lived and walked in the world, and, how there was a specific statement like Black girls have always been invisible. Like her mom kind of taught her that she wasn't going to be listened to or heard, and this is something that carried over, for her even as an adult. So yeah, it is something to come to grips with, the things that are just historical in a larger spectrum in our communities, but then also in the ways that we are taught.
Yeah, yeah. I'm glad you pointed that out, right? Because her mother, her mother believes, right? Like you should not get involved. You should be like a good Black girl, right? And that is, by doing that, it is looking a certain way and behaving a certain way. And it's also too, it's like affirming in some ways to like a white standard. Um, and so Mira has been taught that. And so she's beginning to, not only has she been taught that, but then she also too, like there's a lot of situations where she tries to get Jesse to sort of conform, right? As a way of, as an attempt at protecting him. And, but like, again, right? Like this doesn't, the, like, conforming to like a white ideal or conforming to like white expectations is a function of white supremacy, and it's not going to, ultimately it's not going to change things. Like people, like it's not going, like she believes that somehow she'll be saved from racism, right? And her mother believes this, but it's not, right? Like it's
Right.
not. It's a way we say these things and we do these things as an attempt to sort of self-police or police our communities, but ultimately, um, it does more harm than good, right? And it's also too, it's shifting the conversation to what should be. It's shifting the conversation and shifting the blame to like what we really should be like talking about and focusing on. That makes sense.
Absolutely. Now, one of the things, and this isn't, this isn't anything that's going to give too much away, but one of the things that, you and I talked about a little bit before is that it's a situation where, you have things going on that happened in the past, and then you have
Yeah.
these reenactments. Then you have things in Mira seeing that appear to be reenactments, but then they're
Yeah.
not really reenactments.
Yeah.
All of these things coming together. And I guess the biggest thing is, well, when you think of the reckoning, you're thinking it's going to be a reckoning where all of these people who have done harm to the enslaved Black people in this town over the years, that the reckoning is going to be is that they're going to get their comeuppance, basically, that
Yeah.
they're going to ultimately suffer for the things that they have done. And there's a little of that, but not necessarily the way that one might think. So in crafting the story, and I looked at some of some of the things that you've been interviewed, there was kind of a fine line for you in that, having it be an out and out, revenge,
Yeah.
the enslaved are going to come back and take everybody out versus not having it happen that way. What was kind of your thought process in doing that, or how we or Black people would be perceived, depending on
Yeah.
which way you went with that.
Yeah. It's, it's hard, right? Because when you think about this premise, I feel like in either, like, no matter which direction you go, it's thorny. Right? Because like if you have this larger premise, if you of like slaves enacting revenge, right? And we went through, like, with me and my agent and my editor, we went through a lot of discussion about this, and at times it was a point of contention because like if you do have that premise, right, and you do have a situation, if you take it literally and you write a book where it's like this is literally happening, right, and you present this, like, how do you do that in a way that does not affirm uh this stereotype of Black people being violent, right, of Black people being a threat, um and then so it's like on one hand you have this, but then on the other hand, like, there is this premise, right, and so you do have to have it like live up to it in some sort of way, right, and like, I settled on what I settled on in terms of the book. I understand that if people don't like it, but it is what I settled on. For me, again, I mean, I don't know, I feel like a lot of people get their reckoning in the book,
Mm-hmm.
but I guess and I think also too, like, there is this question of, I think part of what is happening in this book is this larger question of should there be a reckoning for descendants of those who participated in the slavery system, and then what would it look like, right? Like, that's the larger sort of question that Jesse and Mira debate, right? Like,
Right.
Jesse, like, how much do we owe to one another, right? Both because of the past, but also to how much do we owe to one another in the present, right? And for Jesse, like, Jesse's like, I don't owe these people
I
anything,
don't
right?
know anything.
Like, morally, I'm going to be free no matter what. Like, it's, if this situation is true, if this is really happening, like, he's like, whatever, I don't care, right? But like for Mira, there's this element of, is this morally wrong to sort of wash our hands in the same way that white people have done historically to us, right?
Mhm.
Or is it justified, and or are we okay and just sort of just ignoring it if this is true, right?
Mhm.
Do these people deserve a reckoning, right? I mean, that's the larger question. And I wanted people to think about that in the book. And then I wanted the people to finish the book and to be questioning that, right?
Right.
Right? Should this happen? Is this, what do we owe each other? And this larger question, what do we owe each other? And then this larger question of like, should there be a reckoning? What does it look like?
Right. Because one of the things I always find interesting, and this is a conversation I have with one of my best friends, when to your point of, of things fitting into the stereotypical view of, Black people as being violent. I'm like, well, if you study history, as
Yeah.
this book speaks of history, and there are things that are mentioned in the book of some of the things that were happening to the enslaved.
Yeah.
Um, there's a lot more violence going on than things that most of us wouldn't even imagine, things that were happening. So it's like, okay,
Yeah. That's, I mean, that's sort of like the flip side of it too, in terms of problems, right? Because how much, like, I've been thinking about this in terms of like horror, like the recent trend in like horror films, right? And shows, right? Like them recently came out and like them got a lot of criticism, right, for how it depicted some of the violence that happens to this Black couple, right? And with this book, like I did at times sort of like that was another concern, right? Like how much do you show, how much you depict, and like how do you do it in a way that is not fetishizing violence?
right,
Um, and for me, I settled on the idea that I like I mean, all of the things like the horror in the book, the things that you read and you're like, this is awful, right? Like all of those pieces are true. They're all based in history.
mm-hmm.
And so for me, like I came to the conclusion that if like, I mean, it's history, so it's different. It's can it be can it be fetish? I always say this word. Can it be fetishizing? Fetishizing would help me. If it's depicting history,
That's
a lot
true.
of people don't know it, which is also another thing. Like a lot of people are like, read this book and they're like, I had no idea, So I don't know.
There were things that I wasn't really aware of that were happening. Because we knew, of course, about people being, beaten and the rapes and things like that. But then there were other pieces, and this isn't giving anything away of people, African skin being cut, and used like leather. I'm like, I never heard that before. So I'm like, wow.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
true.
Yeah, so it's just like wow, so that's why when you read things like that or you learn things like that and you and people want to make you out to be super violent and like if we have learned
Yeah,
from
yeah,
things that have been inflicted upon us,
yeah.
so but yeah, so what in reading the book, of course, what things do you really want people to be able to take away from the story?
That's a good question. I mean, one, thinking about the relationship between the past and the present, right? How the past has influenced the present, how we, particularly within the US, right? Like we are very determined to erase the past, not teach the past, right? We're seeing that play out right and now in a variety of ways, right, in terms of the conversation about critical race theory, right, in
Right.
schools. Like that's one example of this. So that would be one element, right, like thinking about like the connection between these two things, right, and not just how it shapes, how history, the past, how it shapes our current lives, how it shapes how we see ourselves, and how it shapes how we interact with other people. that'd be one element, one piece. And then also to this, again, this larger question of reckoning. Are Black people justified in wanting a reckoning? What would it look like? Um, yeah. um, yeah, this large question of reckoning.
Right. It makes I can't think of the activist that said it last year, but there was one when everything was happening, and she gave this speech that got picked up and went viral. But at the end, she said something to the effect that you should be glad that we just want equality and
Yeah.
not revenge.
Yeah.
So yes,
I've heard that a couple of times, and I think I heard that too when I was thinking about writing this book, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so again, like I was like, what would this look like? What would, but that's also too, that's always been the fear, like white fear, right, of Black people, that they would seek revenge, that they would actually be the threat, right? And historically, policy decisions have been made, right, based off of that fear. Like Black people have been policed out of that fear.
Mm-hmm.
So again, like kind of going back to what at the beginning of this, right? Like what I was saying in terms of the horror premise and like how it's um, like a white gaze sort of thing, right? Like the idea of white fear of Black people, right? Like that is intrinsic in this premise, right? Of slaves coming back and seeking revenge. So the question is, what I like. So for white people who are reading the book, right? Like one piece of it is thinking like, should this be justified? But also too thinking about the ways in which history, right, has contributed to these experiences of Black people in the present. So.
Yeah, absolutely. So I really, I appreciate the book because I learned some things. And it also just, made me think about, the way that I may think about certain things that happen, around me that are going on, because for me, yes, it's the thought of the reckoning of, what happened at this plantation and the people in the community, but then also just Mira, her process, seeing her go from this person who wasn't unsure about certain things, and then throughout the book she continues to get bolder and take more steps, and and listen and watch and learn, and things like that. So I thought that was great. We see this book takes place over the course of a couple of days, the main thrust of the story, but there is so much growth that happens just because based upon the events at the wedding, at the plantation. So I thought that was powerful. So
Thank you.
I've had the name up there the whole time, but so you can see what the cover of the book looks like when the reckoning comes. And I suggest you grab a copy if you haven't read it yet. It's an interesting read. It's not one that's going to take a month to read if you read fast.
It's a
But
quick
if you
read.
just like to learn more about the story, and just to be able to get in on some of the conversations about it, that's just some of the themes within it. So I know we were talking earlier, LaTanya, about been doing a lot of the virtual tour and things like that. Are you working on any additional projects, or just basically continuing to promote this one right now, or?
So I write both fiction and nonfiction, and I'm trying. I'm not sure which thing I'm going to get to next. I do have another book idea. I wanted to write a book that was centered on the sterilizations that happen on Black women in North Carolina.
Mm.
I haven't decided yet what this book is going to look like, though, because I do want it to also to be like I don't want it to be like just historical, and I wanted to have like a. I'm thinking of it of being like a dystopian sort of like story um,
Mm-hmm.
that utilizes elements of that past. And I'm also too like I'm toying around with writing this. As I'll probably do this first. This essay. A couple of years ago, not a couple of years ago, when I was in college, I got bacterial meningitis, and I was in a coma, and then when I came out of the coma, I had all these seizures. But like one of the things that happened was that a lot of my memory from before the coma was erased. I also too will have like memory issues, and like I've had memory issues since then, so I tend to forget a lot of things in terms of people I've known and like experiences and stuff. So like if I don't write it down, if I don't tie it to a specific to something tangible, then I have trouble remembering it. And so I've been thinking about like writing an essay that deals with that, and then deals with like because I like it that deals with this idea if sometimes when you're close with somebody and then it like becomes a disaster and you you sort of you kind of wish that you want to forget it, right? So
Mm-hmm.
the question of like, well, what, like if that could happen, right? Or like what would this look like, or like tying both of these things together. So I'm trying to work on both of these things. We'll see which one gets done
All right.
first.
All right. Well, sounds good. So we'll definitely be on the lookout for what you have coming up next. So that sounds exciting. So I have been streaming at the bottom. Those of you all who want to keep up with LaTanya, see what she's got going on. I know you do a lot more Twitter than Instagram.
I think I'm too old for Instagram. I try to do it and it's so confusing. Like it's different on the website than it is on the phone. And like
It is.
I can't. And then on the phone, like I just can't. I don't know. Like I don't know how to navigate it at all. It's just driving me. I don't know. This is why I also too like somebody suggested TikTok, and then I looked at that for like a day, and that was when I really realized that I'm too old for this.
Well, I'm kind of with you on the TikTok. There is a TikTok page that I have, but I have yet. I like to go watch what other people are doing.
I can't. And then I like Instagram. I've read that it's supposed to be like more like they're trying to make it more like TikTok, but I can't. Sometimes people will like make a post, and I don't know the difference between like liking or like doing a heart for a post versus sometimes people send me a message that is actually like a post too, or that I can share. I don't know. Like I can't. But like that's why like I'm not on there, because I don't know. It's too much, I think. And then also too with writers, like there's so many platforms, right? Like there's
That's true.
Facebook.
That's true. That's true. There are a lot of different platforms. So since you mentioned writers, just in the last couple minutes, since you not only teach writing, you are a writer. Are there any like quick and dirty tips that you have for any budding writers? Because I know there are people here that like to, are thinking about it or would consider writing a book or short stories or whatever platform.
That's a good question. I guess my biggest advice, I was never the best writer in any of my classes. I was never the favorite writer. I also too have throughout most of my career have really lacked support. But one of the things that I learned very early on is that you can, and like you can publish a story and then be forgotten. You can publish a book and then be forgotten. You can publish, you can win an award, right? The thing that matters and what you have to keep reminding yourself is that you should always keep going. And the people who have success in this field are those who are always like they just keep going, and they keep striving to improve themselves, whatever that looks like. That's like an individual for each person. So that would be my like advice, is just to keep going, and to be reading a lot, and to be curious. I think that's a big thing too. But yeah, the writers who are successful at this, because it's a lot of rejection, it's a lot. But you just have to keep going, right? And make the work be the thing that matters, and not this other stuff. This other stuff can get you down sometimes.
Well, that's good advice. So thank you so much, LaTanya, for coming on and joining us this evening. It was indeed a pleasure, and I hope to be able to keep up with you. We keep up with each other and see what you've got going on. What comes up next is some of the other things you say you're working on. I can't wait to see them and read them as well. So just real quick before we sign off for the night, I just want to let folks know what's coming up next. So 2 weeks from today, I will be talking to I'm going to say this name wrong. I'll get it right before I interview her. It's Nguni. And the book is Looking for Hope. It is like a coming of age story that takes place. It has an historical bent to it as well. Takes place in like the 60s, and the young lady, her coming of age story. And then after that, that will be on the 30th. And then next month, I'll have to post the date because right now I can't remember what the exact date is. I want to say it's the 9th. It's the Thursday following Labor Day. We will talk to Honore Fanon Jeffers about the love songs of W.E.B. Du Bois. So looking forward to that. I'm going to have a lot of reading to do.
Yeah. That gets a lot of attention. So that's
yeah, so we'll be talking to her after that, and pretty much every other week we'll have another wonderful Black woman author on to share their books, share their stories, and just to encourage you to get out and read and learn more about what they've got going on. So once again, thanks again, LaTanya, for being here. I wish everybody a good night, and I'll see you in a couple of weeks.
okay. Bye.
All right, bye-bye. LaTanya, hang on for a second.